Today, we are diving into a story of courage, consequence, and the path to redemption. Rashmi Airan was once a high powered Ivy League educated attorney who had it all, or so it seemed. But a single choice changed everything and landed her in federal prison. So, in this episode, we're not just talking about what happened, but we're exploring the why and why this might relate to you. What drives a person to cross ethical lines? And perhaps more importantly, how do they find their way back? If you're listening today, there's a reason that you tuned in. Maybe it's because you or somebody you know is struggling with their own decisions, their own battles with integrity. Maybe you've done something that's caused you or your loved ones tremendous shame. So I invite you to listen in with an open heart and mind because Rashmi's study story touches on growth, on resilience, and on everything you need to do to rebuild your life. So this is an episode that you do not want to miss. So, Rashmi, you and I know each other very well. So, I want you to tell the audience in 1 minute or one breath or less who you are and why they should listen to this episode.
Sure. Thanks so much, Marcy. I'm so happy to be here. Um, you already did the intro, so I will say that I went from being the child of immigrant parents from India with the drive to succeed, with certainly the self-induced pressure to succeed, and my entire life, I absolutely defined myself. All my self-worth and self-value was rooted in what I achieved. And I don't think this is I'm not the exception. I think this is a very common story. And so in 2007, when I had the chance to meet this developer, ultimately I made some bad decisions. And I recognize now that I did that based on sort of this innate desire to achieve, which in my mind meant to make money. And as I've deconstructed that over the years, I've realized that there was a lot of ego. There was a lot of, other things attached to that decision that I wish I could go back and change now. Uh, but I know better now.
So, we're going to talk a little bit about how you got there and who this developer was and kind of that saga. But
Mm,
let's rewind a little bit.
mm.
You said you're the child of immigrants, driven to succeed. So, of course, law school. What drew you to a legal career? And do you still love being a lawyer?
So I'll start by saying I'm not allowed to be a lawyer anymore because of my case.
Hmm.
Technically, in 2019, I would have been eligible to reapply to the bar. But unfortunately, Florida, as many of us know, is a little backwards compared to many other states. And I am not allowed to reapply to the bar because my civil rights have not been restored, because I have a huge restitution judgment still that's against me. And I'll never pay it off in my lifetime. And so, if that were to ever go away, which potentially it could, I'm up for a pardon right now. If that were to ever go away, then I would apply to the bar and have to take the bar exam again. But to answer your question, uh, when I was 10, I remember my dad telling me after something that had happened in his life. I was sitting in the car with him. I remember him very clearly telling me, Rashmi, you would make a great lawyer one day because you are smart and confident. And that was it. Success to me meant I was going to be a lawyer. And I never deviated from that path. Even in college, I had applied to a bunch of jobs and I actually got job offers from investment banks and consulting companies in New York. And I had already applied to law school. So I actually took a deferral from Columbia Law School,
Hmm.
worked in investment banking, and then still went on to law school. The question of whether or not I enjoyed being a lawyer, it's kind of a tricky one. I believe I was really good at being a lawyer. I don't believe I enjoyed it. And I recognize that now, given what I'm doing and how much I enjoy it. So um, I compare it to my father, who loves being a lawyer.
Hmm.
So I know that I didn't love being a lawyer.
Right. So we've used a lot of terms. People have heard about some developer. They've heard about restitution. They've heard people are saying, "What happened? Fill us
Yeah.
in." We jumped in the middle of the story. So tell us what happened. How did you go? And you're still an Ivy educated, I guess, law school graduate. If we can't say lawyer anymore, I think once a lawyer and always a lawyer. You just can't practice law. Let's be more clear,
That's correct. Yeah.
right? But you did the same things I did, right? You went to law school. You took ethics classes.
Mhm.
You clearly knew better. What happened and how did you end up in prison?
So I was running my own real estate law practice. I had left. I had worked for a litigation company firm in California, another one in Miami. I was actually a government attorney for the county, Miami-Dade County, for a period of time. When I started my practice in 2004, I remember just feeling stressed all the time. I had a small little company. I had 5 people that worked for me. I was doing only real estate. And I was pounding the pavement. So I would go to every networking event. I would sell my services at the gym. I would, every possible thing that I could do to get clients. And at the time, my husband was a firefighter. So I was the major breadwinner in the family. And we had little kids. My kids were 2 and 3. So when I was asked to go meet a real estate developer, right in the heyday of the real estate craziness, right? It was 2007. South Florida was booming. It was before the crash.
Mm-hmm.
And the story that went on in my head was, God, if I can just get one big client, that would mean volume business. That would mean financial stability. That would mean the answer to all of my problems, right? Then I can make that money. And, my marriage was having issues, some of it financial related. So I was like, oh, this will solve my marriage issues. This will give me more time with my kids. So there was this, I saw it as a solution to the problems that I was having. And so when I went in to go meet the developer, his two right-hand guys were there. He himself was sitting in his office. And essentially they began to describe these creative transactions that they were doing. And I know now, and I realize now, I didn't ask the questions I should have asked. As an attorney, we're held to a higher standard and we have a fiduciary duty. And I tell people now, not doing something is still doing something wrong. I know now that I didn't do what I should have done, which is I didn't do my due diligence. I didn't dig deeper in what they were doing. And in fact, the first thing he said to me was, we've been working with a big law firm, but we want to leave them and work with you. It should have been a huge red flag because I should have said, what is it about this law firm that they either don't want to work with you or you decided not to work with them? Because, that would have been very telling.
Right.
Had I dug deeper, I would have learned that they had said that they're not going to work with him anymore. So, instead what went on through my head when he said that was I was arrogant and I was flattered. And I thought, yeah, because I'm strategic and bold and creative and I think outside of the box. And, this is what we convince ourselves, right? Justification goes on in our mind.
So I'm going to stop you for a second just to make sure I'm clear. So far, we have a situation where you're lots of money floating around because some people listening are not lawyers. So I want them to really kind of think about this could happen to anybody. Yes,
Yes,
lawyers are held to a higher standard, but so are you if you're a doctor or an accountant or somebody that's got a fiduciary duty. So you
that's
have a
correct.
lot of money floating around. You're on your own. You've got marriage issues. You're raising 2 small kids. You are the breadwinner in the house. You want to make some money. And the ego of somebody leaving a big company and coming to you makes you say, you know what? I don't want to ask him any questions. Did you actually say in your head, let me not ask any questions? Or do you think you're so blinded by the opportunity that you just kind of glossed over that?
Oh, it was an absolute blind spot. Yes.
Okay.
I don't think I consciously even had any questions. I was so enamored and romantic, the romanticized notion of having this great client. And yes, Marcia, they're like, no matter what profession we are in, the attractive idea of having financial stability is very blinding.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I'll clarify something. The money that we're talking about, so the money that I made were, I say, legitimate legal fees on, in every transaction. I didn't make extra money that was sitting in some bank account and, in the islands. It was,
Right.
so there wasn't, the amount of money was not the point. It was still financial stability, overwhelming financial stability over me having to go out and find 100 clients versus just one client.
Right. Got it.
So I would say over the period of 15 months, I worked with this client and I stopped working with him in 2009. Actually merged my practice with my father's, who's a lawyer, as I said. And then I didn't do any transactional work. And I was growing this new law firm with my dad. I grew it by 1,200%. I'm an entrepreneur at heart. This is what I do. I grow businesses and I sell. And when the FBI knocked on my door in 2011, in my mind, I was like, I haven't done anything wrong. I haven't done
Right.
anything wrong. Do I need a lawyer? No, I don't need a lawyer. So I didn't even have a lawyer with me, which seems absolutely insane that I met with the FBI without a lawyer. Like I should know better.
Right.
But I had convinced myself that I had nothing to hide. And my files were perfect. They had already been audited. So I knew my files were clean. They grilled me for 4 hours and he was like, have you seen this? Have you ever seen this person? They showed me a driver's license. Have you ever seen this attachment? They showed me a document. did you ever see this email? They would show me an email. And I was answering these questions, yes, no, yes, no.
Because you had no fear.
I had no fear. I 100% did not recognize the reach of the federal government. I didn't, I just was so naive
Mm-hmm.
and blinded, sort of internally of what could happen. I just truly didn't think that I had anything to worry about. Yeah, I had no fear. So then 2 years later, I got a grand jury subpoena. So just to give the audience, the listeners, a perspective, this is 6 years after I met my client.
Wow.
4 years after I stopped working with him, I got a grand jury subpoena. And I still thought they just want my files, but they're not after me. But pretty quickly, my attorney called me in and told me I was a target, which I also had no idea what that meant. When I realized and understood, I thought I was in a twilight zone. It was like my whole life came crashing down around me.
Wow.
I was hysterical. I was shaking uncontrollably. And the first thought through my head was I had disgraced my parents. I have disgraced my family and my community. As you know, Marcy, I sit on a lot of boards in Miami, and I thought the executive directors that I work with are now going to be affected by what's happening to me. So there was a lot of now fear of what the consequences of this was going to be for others.
Right.
You know,
So you have this situation where you're now done something 6 years before. You had some blind spots. You also didn't necessarily understand, what could I have done wrong? Why do I need a lawyer? Um, and then what happens next?
what happens next is I try really hard not to get indicted, and I I did things that I wish I could take back. Like uh, I tried to convince. I hired. So my prosecutor's name is Joe Capone. He was a special investigator out of HUD from DC. He used to be in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Miami. So I hired. My attorney knew his former boss. I hired his former boss to see if we could sway Joe from not indicting me. Like taking personal relationships, like little things that I thought I could, you know, I would say that I was very arrogant and
Mm-hmm.
blind to the reality of what was happening. I thought this is one more thing I can handle and take care of. And
Because lawyers, that's what we do. We solve
yeah,
problems.
we solve problems. We're doer, and I'm a doer. I am very action oriented. I quickly learned that uh, he was absolutely going to indict me. Nothing I said or did. He kept trying to get me to come speak to him, and he said he would tell my attorney, Rashmi still has time. Maybe we could talk to her about a deal, but we just want to talk to her and learn what she knows. And I really didn't think I knew anything. I had no sense of what I knew.
But what were they
Or
charging you with? And what were they charging your former client with?
at the time, I didn't know initially. So my former client did not get indicted. He was not even involved in this process,
Hmm.
which was very upsetting to me, honestly. And ultimately, I let go of that anger. From a spiritual perspective, I sort of just told myself that, like, whatever happens to me is going to happen to me, and I can't change what happens to him, so I have to let it go. And
Mm-hmm.
truthfully, the first step I did was I forgave myself, which was the hardest thing I've ever had to do up until that point. And then I forgave him,
Mm-hmm.
and I at the time actually I did not know that he would not be indicted, but I still forgave him. I then found out he wasn't being indicted, and because I'd already forgiven him, it was probably spiritually the best thing I could have done for my emotional well-being. Um, so eventually, when I did get indicted, I got indicted for 1 count of conspiracy to commit bank fraud and 24 counts of bank fraud. So they took 24 of the transactions out of the 200 and they attached it to that complaint. And that's what I got indicted for.
So when you were doing these things back in 2007, 2008, did you think you were engaging in bank fraud?
And I get asked this question a lot. My gut was absolutely screaming, "What are you doing? This doesn't feel right. Ask more questions." And I just kept ignoring my gut, my inner voice. So I knew something was up. I just didn't want to ask the right questions. I didn't want to know. I say now, like, I didn't ask because I didn't want to know, because I needed to keep this client. I
Okay.
was comfortable. And there I made a lot of assumptions too, that you know plenty of other attorneys in Miami who are kind of doing something similar. And I just convinced myself that it must be okay if everybody else is doing it, right? Like,
Right.
why shouldn't why why shouldn't it be okay if other law firms are doing it? Like, so, so the learning for me has been, it doesn't matter if other people are doing it. If it's wrong, it's wrong. And
Mhm.
one of the things I've really come to terms with is I got indicted and other people didn't, and that it just is what it is.
So you get indicted and then you go to jail. Obviously, there's
Well,
some steps in between there.
yeah, I pled guilty. I served. Ultimately, I got sentenced to a year and a day, and then I served about 6 months of that. And there's a lot.
Okay.
There's a lot of stories in there of what happened. Yeah.
But I want to go back to something you said before, that you forgave your client, and that was the best thing you could do spiritually. We'll get to forgiving yourself in a minute. But what was that process to forgive your client, especially, I guess, to re forgive once you found out that you're going to jail and this person is not?
Yeah. The process was, for me, a lot of prayer, a lot of journaling, and talking to friends and loved ones, to the point where I recognized, I believe that whatever happens in our lives, okay, now I'm going to get into like a spiritual conversation, but
Yep,
what I
absolutely.
believe is that whatever happens to me is meant for me. And and that's good or bad. And so, for example, I'm a motivational speaker now. I'm a speaker, so like I believe that any events that are meant for me, nobody can take from me, and whatever's not meant for me is not meant for me. So, in that same vein, I believe that the developers quote karma, like his karma was not this. He has another karma in his lifetime that he was supposed to learn. I'll share that when I first got the grand jury subpoena, and I was just terrified. I I went to my mom. Of course, I told my parents, and my mom said, "Honey, this is your karma. You're going to have to live with it. There's some lesson you're supposed to learn from it." And I went through this journey where one of the stories I always tell people is about 2 or 3 weeks after I got indicted, way before I had decided to plead guilty. We had decided we would tell our Indian community because my parents are leaders in our community. And so we called all my aunties and uncles to the house. And I remember before they came, I was so convinced that I had disgraced my parents that every one of these aunties and uncles, once they found out, would shun my parents and walk
Hmm.
out. So now everyone's at the house, and I'm sitting on the couch, and my mom is sitting on one side, and this one of the uncles is sitting here, and my dad is in the corner, and he tells everybody, that I've been indicted. He's crying. I'm crying. My mom is sitting here, hard as nails. She's doesn't cry. And this uncle here says to me, Beti, which in Hindi means daughter, one day that you'll realize that this is not happening to you, it's happening for you. So until that point in my life, I had never heard this phrase. Obviously, since
Right.
I have heard it in other contexts, and it really hit me, right? Like I don't know why I'm going through this, but I recognize that there's a higher purpose here. And so that really kind of started my spiritual journey. And then once I decided to plead guilty, that helped. So when I walked into prison, I walked in with a very positive, calm sense. Like I was very at peace with what was happening, which is very bizarre, right? Because I've lost my freedom, I've lost all my money, I've lost my license, I'm losing the right to be with my children. There was so much I was losing. But what I had faith in 100% was, I don't know why I'm going through this. I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but I have a faith that it will be for my good. And I will be able, there was something good that will come out of it. And that absolutely has manifested for me. So, so the forgiveness journey for him was necessarily attached to my own forgiveness.
Okay. You talked about the shame you felt,
Mm.
um, and having to face the community and thinking that was going to shame your parents also.
Mm.
What did you do to get past that sense of shame? Shame is one of the hardest things for most people to overcome. And for many of them, it leads to lifelong guilt. It leads to not taking certain opportunities. It leads to so many doors that get closed because we imprison ourselves, no pun intended, with this shame. So, how did you get past the shame? And what advice can you give for others on that?
So the way I have embraced the shame in my life, I would say, is after I forgave myself, I just allowed myself to be completely vulnerable. And so my entire life, I always had this armor, right? Of course, Brene Brown's my hero. And so
Hmm.
I I was armored up. And you can ask my ex-husband, most of my friends, the walls around how I allowed myself to feel were very thick. And to me, being vulnerable was a weakness, right? This is something that I think most of us have learned, have
Hmm.
sort of been conditioned. And as I went through this journey, I read many of Brene Brown's books.
Hmm.
In fact, the first book I read, my first night in prison, was The Gifts of Imperfection. I started to read by Brene Brown. And it helped me understand that I'm imperfect and that's okay. I'm imperfect and I'm still loved. And through my journey of accepting and owning it, I called over 200 people in the Miami community and beyond, leaders, politicians, my friends, and told them what I did. And that process of vulnerability and owning it. And one of my friends said, "You stood naked and exposed for all of us to judge you, and you let us judge you. And we love you more for that." And so that, like, I get chills because my whole life I had thought people loved me for my achievements. And this was like the moment, like it brings tears to my eyes. Like this was the moment that I realized people love me for me. And like, what a beautiful thing for me to recognize that I have done a shameful thing, but I am standing in my truth and owning it and recognizing that that's a chapter in my life. It does not define who I am. It's just one of my stories. And it has now made me a much better person today. So the process of walking through shame and owning it for me is 100% rooted in vulnerability and accountability, um, and like talking through, having really courageous conversations, which I don't think I was equipped to do when I was a kid and when I was growing up. I just didn't know that was a thing.
Right.
So I tell people I had to lose my freedom to gain complete freedom because I live in 100% transparency all the time now. It's such a freeing feeling. It really is.
So, speaking of kids, how did you tell your kids about this? Because we spend a lot of time telling our kids right from wrong. And how
Mhm.
did you have to go to them and say, Mommy did something wrong? And what was their reaction? How old were they at the time when you told them? And what was their reaction?
So they were 7 and 8 at the time, 9 and 10 when I was in prison. And the way we told them was this: I now my ex-husband, but at the time my husband and I knew we wanted to tell them the truth. And if we go back to spiritually what I believe, which is this was my karma. I also believe that my kids were going to learn something from this, and I didn't yet know what it was, but I knew I wanted to honor them with the truth. I didn't want to hide from it. There were many, many women that were in prison with me that had lied to their children,
Hmm.
and I could see the consequences of that. So the way I told my kids, it was about 2 weeks after I got sentenced. Um, we sat them down, and so both of my kids are athletes, and at the time they were playing various sports. And so I did like a sports analogy for them, and I essentially said, like, if you Kyler, if he was playing flag football at the time, I said, if the coach tells you to run a 5 and out, and instead you aren't paying attention in the huddle and you go out and you run a 7 and out, well, he's going to punish you. He might pull you out for a set of downs. He might not put you in for the next quarter. Like, there's going to be a punishment. Maya was playing soccer at the time, and I said, Maya, if you do something and you get a red card, like, the ref might pull you out, the coach might pull you out. But in real life, there are real life consequences. And mommy has done something, and I made some bad decisions, and I'm going to have to go away for a year. And it was hard. It was scary. The kids were full of lots of questions. They wanted, ultimately, I think our children always want to know that we're going to be safe and that we
Right.
will, in this regard, they wanted to make sure I would eventually come back home
Hmm.
and to them. So I was lucky enough that I had 60 days before I had to surrender. And so after I told them, and I was allowed to travel, like I had some miles that I was allowed to use to travel with them. So I remember I took them up to North Carolina, to my alma mater, and we walked around UNC's campus, and we did some hiking nearby, and it just gave the kids time to slowly process. And then every now and then they would ask me a question like, Mommy, can we come visit you? Mommy, what will you eat? Mommy, can we call you? Like all the things that a little 9 and 10-year-old want to know. So I was able to call them and I would answer their questions. And then when I was away, I was very methodical about how I kept in touch with my children. So
I was
I
going
would
to
wake
ask
up.
you if you let them come to see you and what that was like for them.
I did let them come to see me. They saw me twice in Miami. I was in Miami for about 10 days in a holding center. They saw me twice there, which was actually pretty awful because um, it's very structured. They can't hug you. Like there were a lot of really awful things about it. And it was horrible for them to like be in that visitation situation who
Right.
they're around. But I would say they visited me 4 times when I was at Coleman, which is a minimum security camp for women. Actually, now they've converted it to men, but at the time it was for women, an hour north of Orlando. And so when they came to visit me, it was really interesting because they just got to be exposed to so much other things that they wouldn't have otherwise seen. Um, there was a part of that you had asked me, and I glossed over the question. It'll come to me.
It's okay. Just a conversation.
Yeah. So the kids were very open to, I think, learning about the situation. And the way I communicated with them every day was I would wake up in the morning and, after getting ready, the first thing I would do is I would go send them an email. So there were basically like computer terminals that we were allowed to use, but we had to go through uh, it was like a court it was like a I guess it was like a BOP portal, a Bureau of Prisons portal to email. It's called Corliss. So that's how I could email with, they call it the outside, so outside of prison. I was allowed to have 30 people on my email list, no more. Of course, both of my children were two of them. And so every morning I would send them an email. Good morning, and I wanted them, there was always an hour delay from when I sent it to when they received it. And they got used to checking their emails, this special terminal, this special site. And I wanted them to receive the email before they went to school every day. So that was my daily routine, and even on the weekends.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that every morning, and then every evening there was a set time that I would call the kids every evening. So yeah, and then I would write to them, send them cards, and they visited me when I was away about every other week or every third week.
What did you learn most about yourself being in prison?
Oh, wow. I don't think I've been asked that question.
Finally, because I know you've been in a million podcasts.
uh, I think what I've learned most is my ability to to ask really hard questions. I think I'm able to like see through, I guess in the work that I do, right? I see through a lot of the armors and walls that people put up easily because we're so conditioned to do so. So I would say in my work, I would say I shine in that, and my superpower I think is I create vulnerability. It's like I give people permission to be vulnerable because of how open I am. Uh, I mean, if I'm being completely transparent, one of the biggest things I learned about myself is that I love who I am without regards to what I've achieved, right? I acknowledge my humanity, and it's such a beautiful place to be. I think a lot of us live in this sense of the shoulds, and
Mm-hmm.
I should do this and I should do that, and we should all over ourselves versus
Right.
just acknowledging who we are.
So you went from being a lawyer to experience something that most people will never experience: public scrutiny and incarceration. So some people experience one or the other.
Hmm.
But you were talking about, for people who are not from South Florida, you knew a lot of people. I mean, you still do, but so you're calling up politicians and lawyers and judges and all of these people. So there's that scrutiny. And then there's also the incarceration. So I want to ask, what was the most challenging part of reconciling those two parts of yourself? And how did you rebuild your sense of identity? How did you rebuild or build the new Rashmi?
Um, oh God, jeez, you're like throwing me for a loop today. So,
That's why they pay me the big bucks.
I know. How did I build my sense of identity? you know, the sense of public scrutiny and kind of rebuilding of myself when I called everybody. I'll be honest and tell you that when I started making these calls, I was convinced that they were all going to hang up on me. Okay, but I knew I in my mind I knew that I had to call people and not let them read about it. Okay, this is the impetus and the initiative. Like, I didn't want people to read about it. I didn't want people to gossip about it. It was really, I wanted to take ownership and tell people. And whether they supported me or not, I let go of my ego. I let go of that fear that I had, and I just made every call. And in the process of making these calls, I learned something, which is people are very forgiving of our humanity if we give them the chance
Yeah.
to do that. And most of us live in this world, in this place where we think we have to pretend to be something we're not. We put up an aura, we post on social media because we think we have to show up in a certain way. And there's a lot of ego attached to that, right? Like, and when we let that sort of wash away and allow people to see our true selves, there's an incredible amount of respect that comes from that. And I had not known that that would be possible. I absolutely was not in that space, and I got kind of forced to be in this space. And so that learning from me helped me understand that my reputation, I thought, would be lost. And yet my reputation, I think, now is intact and stronger. Are there people that are still going to pass judgment on me? Yes. Are there naysayers and trolls out there that have all sorts of negative things that they want to say about me? There will always be. I have just learned to silence them and not pay attention to them, because the way I see it, those people are not yet ready to hear what I have to say and the message that I've learned,
Right.
because none of us are immune to our sins. None of us are perfect. We've all done things that we wish we could go back and change. Mine happens to be this. And I'm not at all minimizing what I did, right? I don't excuse what I did. I don't justify what I did. I've taken full ownership and I've paid serious consequences. But we are all humans and fallible. And that learning from me has helped me stand in this place of shame. And so, being incarcerated brings with it, lots of things. I still can't vote. Uh, I can't I can't serve on a jury. I have a restitution judgment, so I can't take out a mortgage. I
Are
mean,
you
there's
comfortable
so
saying
many.
what that restitution judgment is? Because you said earlier you'll never be able to pay it off in your lifetime. You don't have to if you don't
Yeah.
want to.
So it's a combined about $19 million.
$19 million.
Yes, and if you would like, I can share with you who my victims are.
Sure, I'd love to hear. Because I've
The
heard this
victims,
before, but I want the audience to hear. Who
the
do you owe
victims,
$19 million to, Rashmi?
yeah, the victims in my case are Bank of America, J.P. Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, and HSBC, and a couple of other small banks.
So
And
basically, a lot
so,
of banks that have $19 million in the in the cushion of the couch, pretty much.
yeah, and essentially every month I go. Honestly, I go to the local grocery store, which in Miami is Publix. I get I get money orders, and then I go to the UPS office and I send it by mail so I can track it to the clerk of courts every month, and then the clerk of courts divvies it up and sends it. And to give you an idea, I have paid thus far over $500,000 to my restitution, me personally, and I made about a little more than $100,000 in these cases, in these files. So I've more than paid my share, I think. But
So
and
I'm going to stop you. I want to make sure everybody hears this. You
Yeah,
made $100,000 from this client over a
yeah,
period of 2 years.
yes,
You get indicted, the client does not. You get sentenced to a year and a day after pleading guilty, but you serve about 6 months where you're away from your children, although you see them occasionally, but you're in a prison not close to where you live. You have a $19 million restitution to places like JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, HSBC, Wells Fargo, all huge banks, many whom have been accused of all kinds of things in the past. And have had about fleecing consumers, etc. And I'm not saying anything bad. I do know people that work for all those institutions, so this is not casting aspersions on them. But
yeah,
these are banks that have themselves been in the newspaper for their practices. You have paid back $500,000. and you just have 18,500,000 to go.
Yeah.
Am I clear? Did I get all those facts right?
You got all the facts right. And I did 200 hours of community service, and I did 3 years of supervised release, which meant when the 3 years I was on supervised release, I did start doing speeches, and the judge in my case wouldn't let me make money while I was giving those speeches. When, people started wanting to like give me
Hmm.
speaker fees or honorariums. And so I waived almost 300 speeches worth of fees, speaker
Wow.
fees, which is pretty significant over time. And yeah, I'm now in that rebuild phase, and having lost everything, it takes a while to come back. And I want to acknowledge that I am so blessed uh, to have the family I have, to have the parents and support that I have, that I know many, many women in my situation that went to prison don't have access to and don't have. So I know how lucky I am, and it never goes unnoticed to me that I had that privilege of my family. So, but for my family, I would not be in the situation that I'm in to support my children in the way I support them and do what I do.
I have to assume that some people listening will say, wow, $19 million, that's the worst thing that can happen. What was the worst part about it, about your current situation, not going to jail? Is it that you can't vote? Is it that you can't be a lawyer? Is it the loss of the identity of being a lawyer and being able to practice law? What is it? Maybe it's the $19 million, but besides the money, what is the toughest part today, present day, that you're experiencing? What's the
If I
biggest loss?
Yeah, if I'm being 100% honest, right now, today, the hardest part is, even so, my new profession is giving keynote speeches and leadership consulting services. And unfortunately, even though this is a space that I'm in, I just had a client that sought me out. It's funny enough, it's a financial institution, sought me out through my website. We went back and forth. They contracted with me. I filled out all of the vendor forms. We were contracted. I had flights booked to go to their conference. And then at the last minute, they said, "Oh, sorry, we can't have you because of your record." And so, like, it's still there. There are still people that will make them say no to me. And that is really hard. And when this happens, I'm human. It's hard. Like, I have to, like, not take it personally. Just, if it's not meant to be, it's not meant to be, but like recognize all my things. It's still hard. And I'm not going to lie. It's made me cry. Like, those things that happen. I'm like, really? Like, I have so much I can share with your audience. So that is, in my current situation, the hardest thing. I mean, a close second is not being able to vote, and this being an election year, and I desperately want to vote in this election. Thankfully, both of my children are now of a voting age and will be voting. So 2 for 1. um, but yeah,
Wow.
I wish I could vote.
You talked earlier about prayer and spirituality. Um, Give us a little bit of an insight about how that helped you through your darkest periods and what practices or beliefs that you developed or strengthened, and maybe how that can inspire people who are listening, who again may not be going to prison, but they are dealing with their own sense, their darkness. They feel like they're in a pit they can't come out of, or they feel like they can't get out of this financial morass that they're in, just like how you were feeling.
Yeah.
How did faith or spirituality or beliefs or practices help you?
So I'm really fortunate. My When I was going through this, my grandmother in India said to me, so I was raised Hindu, but I definitely have learned all the customs and the traditions and the stories. I would say I'm now a very spiritual person. So my grandmother calls me and says, I want you to do this very specific prayer every day. And so I did that prayer in Hindi every single day. And it's a long prayer. It's a set of stanzas,
Mm-hmm.
pretty long. It's like 5 or 6 minutes long. And then I listened to as many Joel Osteen sermons as I could,
Joel
and
Osteen.
Joyce
Okay.
Meyer
Mm-hmm.
and TD Jakes. And I went to Shabbat services. So when I tell you that I am an interfaith, open minded, spiritual person, I soaked it in like a sponge from any possible human book, place that I could. to be inspired and, given hope. And so I needed it. That was what kept me going. When I was overcome by fear, that's what kept me going. And I'll tell you that Rashmi means the rays of the morning sun. So it means the light from the sunrise. And interestingly, my whole brand now is rise through it. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a, I help people understand that in every single day, in every moment when life brings us down to our knees, we have to have the courage to know that we can get through it no matter what. And I
Right.
believe that whether it's, for me, obviously I went through many, many hard situations, including prison. I'm also divorced. My sister passed away 5 years ago from mental health issues. The love of my life died 4 years ago from cancer. I have had lots of moments in my life. And so we all go through these moments in our lives, or we're just faced with the unknown,
Right.
the fear of uncertainty, the fear of what's going to happen next. This election is causing a lot of fear. AI causes a lot of fear. I mean, there's just so many things that we're constantly being challenged with. And so I say there's 3 steps. You have to accept and embrace the truth and acknowledge it for what it is. It is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have to let go. And what I believe is we have to let go of ego, fear, control, and judgment. Judgment on ourselves and on others,
Mm-hmm.
and then you act with courage. And this is an iterative, never ending cycle. We're always, I do this every single day, many, many times a day. Every day I have to wake up and acknowledge my truth. And so that if we can get into the mental discipline of this courageous process in our head, then it becomes kind of like second nature. I am lucky enough that I've had parents and grandparents that have role modeled this tenacious surviving mentality. And so I, again, recognize I'm blessed, but we can all learn it. It's something like tomorrow, tonight, we can just start practicing. And the more we practice it, the more light will shine on others and on ourselves.
Now, you've talked about kind of rising through it, but you also have an ethical framework that you've
Mhm.
built.
Yes.
What's the advice you'd give for somebody who right now might be dealing with some kind of ethical dilemma in their career or in their life? How might your framework be helpful?
So, what I believe is, like, from an ethical decision making standpoint, having the mental discipline to commit to a process of decision making, that in and of itself is hard. And it kind of goes hand in hand with the rise through philosophy, but really having that courage to, when we're acting, recognizing how to make good decisions, which I believe is 4 steps. It's, you have to pause, you have to listen to your inner voice, you have to reflect on what your inner voice is telling you, and then you decide what to do. The problem is that most of us are so caught up in this rat race of life, trying to get to our next goal, trying to, go around that race course, that we are so scared to pause for even just a moment, because we're worried that we're going to lose a promotion to somebody else, or we're going to lose the client, or we're not going to be able to achieve what we want to achieve in enough time or as quickly as we want to. And the reality is that that's when the bad decisions happen. So if we just take the moment to pause, and we don't have time, but there's so many stories in this journey that I had with this client, that had I just paused rather than just accelerating and doing,
Right.
I believe I would have made better decisions, or at least I would have stopped and thought about what I was doing, and maybe asked for help or asked for a second opinion. I didn't do any of that. And, once you pause, our inner voice is always there. Our inner voice is always telling us the right thing to do. It's just that we get really good at ignoring it and shutting it down. But that inner voice is our gut, it's our moral compass, it's God, it's energy, it's the universe, it's whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
We all have it. And then when you listen to your inner voice, you can reflect on what your inner voice is telling you, and then choose, right? The inner voice is you're going to reflect on, is this right or wrong? Is it ethical? Is it not ethical? And then you can make the best conscious decision that you can. But you don't even get to do any of that if you don't first pause.
Right.
So that would be my advice.
So, if you could bring a group together of really influential leaders from different fields to have a dinner party at your house, which you'd
Mm,
of course invite me,
yes, of course.
who would you invite and what are the topics you'd want to discuss with them? It could be about ethics, it could be about leadership, it could be about anything else,
Are they alive, or are they maybe
living
not
or
alive?
dead.
Okay, I would invite Mother Teresa uh, because of her gift of her just life of giving and service. I would invite Helen Keller, um, probably Nelson Mandela.
Let's go back to the why for Helen Keller.
Oh, sorry.
And what would you want her to talk about?
Helen Keller, I would want her to talk about her courage, her just um, courage in the face of just daunting, in her case, disabilities, and her innovation and ability to think beyond what she was able to physically do.
Mm-hmm.
Nelson Mandela for his leadership and incredible resilience. One of my favorite quotes is by Nelson Mandela, which I absolutely cannot remember right now, but I think it's I don't want to be judged by how many times I fell down, but how many times I got back up again. I forgot what the actual quote is. My grandfather. So my Dadaji in Hindi is your father's father.
Mm-hmm.
I honor him in every speech I give. He was a freedom fighter with Gandhi during the Quit India movement.
Mm.
On the day my dad was born, he was in prison with Gandhi. And so I never got to meet him. He died when my dad was 16. And so I would love to meet him. He was such a fighter and leader in our community in India, and taught my dad so much. And like that whole idea of, when you learn these hard lessons, you have a responsibility to share it and give back and help others. I get it from him. I tell people that I'm his legacy. I didn't get to meet him, but I'm his legacy. So him, I would love to have, this is going to sound so bad, but I would love to have Taylor Swift there just from a like motivational, entertaining.
Oh, trust me,
I'm a
she's a
big
genius
Swiftie.
in many ways.
Yeah, I'm a big Swiftie. Um, and I don't know, I'm probably saying really common people, but you caught me off guard. How many people do I have to say? 10?
That's okay. No. It was like 4 or
Oh,
5. You
okay, I
got
did
them.
5.
So you talked earlier about Brene Brown, who apparently you're not inviting to dinner, but you
Oh
do.
yeah. Oh, I would definitely add Brene Brown.
Okay,
Sorry. Yes,
but
Brene Brown,
you've been
100%.
inspired by her, as of many
Yeah.
people, and she's written lots of books and talks about vulnerability and leadership. Are there any other authors or books that have really inspired you that might inspire some of the listeners, and why specifically those books? Or it could be a movie, it could be a song, it could be a mantra, it could be anything.
Yeah. Let me think. So I read a lot, and when I was in prison, I read a lot. Okay, let's see. I have read many incredible memoirs recently that um, really moved me. So I was impacted by Alicia Keys's memoir,
Mm-hmm.
Matthew McConaughey. So to me, the genre of memoirs. Isabella Wilkerson wrote a book called Cast, which
Mm-hmm.
maybe you've read.
Yes, I've got it. Yeah.
Ugh, it is a painful, painful read, but so needed in our like we all need to read it to understand. And for me, like one of the hardest parts to read was the part about India and the caste system in India,
Mm-hmm.
because it was like such an educational read for me, because I actually didn't understand how horrible it was. It's like I've seen movies and sort of see it when I go to India, but I didn't understand the really bad, how bad it was. Um, I'm actually reading currently Lovely One
Mm-hmm.
by Katanji Jackson,
Yep.
and
Yep.
so I would say in general the genre of memoirs, right? I know I'm not saying a specific author for
That's
you,
okay.
but I do believe that memoirs are a way for us to learn from others and their ups and downs, and the way they've overcome sometimes, and how they've overcome, or what their life lessons are. I try to read at least one memoir a month, and then I usually read one memoir, one fiction, and one like kind of self-help book, I
Mm-hmm.
would say. There are, I don't know, you caught me off guard. I would have to look at my Audible to see who else
That's
I've
okay.
written. I'm listening to Don't Split the Difference right now
Mm-hmm.
by Chris
Chris
Voss.
Voss. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I'm also listening to oh gosh, what's this guy's name? Something a champion. Hold on, I'm going to tell you right now.
Okay.
It is. It is How Champions Think by Dr. Bob Rotella.
Okay.
And then the book that I read every single year is The Alchemist.
Ah.
Because this is what I believe. I believe that at every point in our lives, that book means something different. So I revisit it every year around this time. So I read it in the summers. And it just helps me like recalibrate my goals. It roots me back into who I am. I love Patrick Lencioni's books.
Mm-hmm.
So because I do a lot of corporate work, so I love his books. Um, who else do I like? Is that enough?
That's
Brian
enough.
Weiss. I'm a big believer in Brian Weiss. So
Of
many
course.
lives, many masters.
Me too. And actually, I was just talking about The Alchemist last night, so it's funny
Oh, you
that you
were?
mentioned that. Yeah. And it's on one. There's a few books I read every year, and that's one of them as well. So
Oh, it is. I
yeah,
love
it's
that. I
interesting.
love that we have that alignment.
Absolutely. Rashmi, what's the best advice you received that you did not take, and how do you think your life would have been different if you did take it?
Um, so I think the best advice I received that I didn't take was God. Gosh. How about okay, in the professional life, in my professional world, we get told often, especially as young attorneys, ask questions. But I believe, at least for me, I thought asking questions meant I didn't know what I should have known. And I thought that would make me vulnerable, and I thought that was a weakness. And so I never asked questions. And when you're a young attorney working at a law firm and you don't know anything, which is how we all start, we're supposed to ask questions. And I remember feeling like I couldn't ask questions or that I shouldn't ask questions. And so, in the professional context, one of my best pieces of advice to young attorneys is ask questions. Like the partners are there, associates are there for you to learn from. And if you don't ask questions, you're never going to know how to do things.
Great. Awesome. Now, you work with lots of leaders. You do motivational speaking. You work in corporations. What's the hardest lesson for leaders to get?
Oh, gosh.
No specific clients, of course. Nobody's
Yeah.
going to go look at your page and say, "Oh, is she talking about the CEO of
Yeah.
that
Yeah. Yeah.
company?" No, just generally, as you work with leaders, what do you think is the hardest lesson that they could get, and how might that change the trajectory of their leadership or their profitability or their ability
Mm,
to
yep.
keep employees or reduce turnover? What do you think that
Yeah.
is?
Honestly, the biggest challenge that leaders have today, I believe, I mean, of course, aside, I mean, it all drops down to being able to overcome, any adversity and getting through the challenges. But what I think is that one of the biggest hurdles is the failure to take accountability.
Mm,
So, of course, I live this principle because I had to do it, and I know how hard it is. So I'm no foreigner to it. But I think the lack of leaders wanting to take accountability, either for their actions, their decisions, their behaviors, their thoughts, leads to a lot of um, unnecessary consequences with it, whether it's dysfunctional teams, whether it's leaders pushing out content or orders or decisions that have yet to be thought through
mhm,
because they're not taking accountability for what they're doing. So I think the lack of accountability, not just in the US, I think this is a global issue. I think the lack of accountability is something that's you know it's a pandemic. I'll tell you that I don't know if you know this, there's a docu-series that's being produced about my story.
no, I did not know that because I was going to ask you about when the book is coming out, but okay.
Yeah, well, I'll go there with you. So the book is in process. I mean, the book is, I just had a call today with the publisher. I'm hoping to get something out in 2025. I'm deciding what to like in terms of publishing, how to go. The docu-series has actually been in the works for about 3 years with the documentary producer. He is very well respected in the world of documentaries.
Mm-hmm,
He's produced a bunch. His company is signed with CAA. He's currently he's now shot video for my sizzle to sell it.
mm-hmm.
That is currently being edited. He hopes to have that done in the next month or two, and then he's going to try to sell it. We'll see who buys it. I think
Get it on
his perspective,
Netflix.
yeah, his perspective is if it doesn't get bought, he raising the money and building and still doing it. He's very committed to the project. But the reason I'm bringing it up, yes, it's a great sales pitch for him. But the reason I'm bringing it up is and if any of you are out there and want to fund it, let us know. But one of the main sort of focuses for him is it, oh, the lack of accountability. Sorry, Marty, I just realized.
It's okay. Okay.
Um,
We'll edit part here. Okay, do you have to run? Okay. Let's just let you say goodbye. What's the one lesson that you wish people would learn after listening to you on this podcast?
So the one lesson I want people to hopefully take away from my story is we are all fallible humans, and no matter what happens in our lives, no matter what we're feeling on a day-to-day basis, no matter what the challenges, no matter what the fears are, I always tell people you can rise through it. We can rise through it no matter what. We have the power, we have the innate strength, and we have to believe that about ourselves.
Well, Rashmi, thank you so much for working with us today. We will actually have all of the links to everything you've ever done, your TEDx talk, your website, in the show notes. Hope you all learned something from this episode. You will share it with others. You'll subscribe to the podcast. And thanks again, Rashmi. It was wonderful to have you today.
Thank you so much, Marcia. I'm so happy to be here. It was
Thank you.
lovely.
Thank you.